Morning from Atlanta. This is John McIntyre with Georgia Tech. I'm greeting you on behalf of the organizing committee for this event, organized by Georgia Tech CIBER and UIBS. We are extremely pleased today in putting together India at 73, its role in the Emerging New World Order webinar, to have our distinguished presenter, Professor Jag Sheth, who is well known to most of you in the audience. I will say very few words about Jag. Suffice it to say that he is the Charles Kelstein Professor of Business in the Goizeta Business School at Emory, our sister institution, 2 miles away from Georgia Tech. He is extremely well known. He's one of the world scholars in consumer behavior, relationship marketing, geopolitical analysis, and a recent recipient of the distinguished Indian government award, the Padma Bhushan, which he received in 2020, the highest civilian award given by the government of India. He has multiple achievements. Many of us in academia know him for some of his books, in particular, The Rule of Three, Chindia Rising, the four as of marketing, Firms of Endearment, Self-Destructive Habits of Good Companies. The Sheth Family Foundation is well known for its generosity and its impact on academia. It's a real pleasure to have him talk to us today. Might I remind you that in a few days, August 15th, India will indeed turn 73 years of age. But that India is 73 years does boggle the imagination and the mind. India is a multi-millennial country, but happy birthday, India, Republic of India at 73. And to really mark the event, happy to welcome you, Dr. Sheth. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, John, for such a great introduction. What a good friend. We have been friends for so many years. Almost as soon as I came to Atlanta in 1991, and you were one of the icons we all talked about in the management school or the business school, especially related to global events. I will start a few comments before we show a formal presentation. I will compress my presentation because John has very good questions for me, which will unlock much more interesting dialogue and debates. So I will just basically make a few comments. In the last 3 months alone, you saw more than $20 billion of investment commitment made to India. At a time when there is a COVID crisis going on, India is still peaking, has not subsided even, but companies lined up to invest in India. And that includes, of course, Amazon some time ago, but Facebook committing $6 billion, Google committing $10 billion, and there are more technology companies waiting in the wings. The next major announcement we all expect would be with IBM's commitment to India. Why are people going to India? And this is nothing new. Actually, Japanese began to invest in India 2-3 years ago. So have done South Koreans. So are now going to happen from Australia in a very big way as Australia distances from China. And things that Australia buys from China probably will be shifted to India across product categories, not just technology. It is going to happen from Canada. And more interestingly, with the Brexit in place, the British are negotiating both with America and with India as the largest alignment, economic alignment that's likely to take place. So my view is that watch England or Britain and see what happens about the alignment, economic alignment, not only political, but military and economic alignment between India and then the British United Kingdom. So it's fascinating to see the architecture. Canada will come also in the play. So now we are talking about several advanced countries. Germany will come also, it looks like, on its own, not just the EU. France will come. France has been committed significantly. All of a sudden, the world seems to have discovered India, which was always there. And this is because India is likely to become the second sourcing destination alternative to China. As the world distances from China, because of the supply disruption of many mundane products like microwave ovens, or paper products or pharmaceuticals, not just the PPP, personal protection equipment, but it's more than that. The world outsourced so much to China, everybody has been dependent on China, and they would like to have some alternatives. I think this is a very key area, just one area. Sourcing destination. More will happen on the sourcing of professional talent, digital talent, services, as opposed to sourcing of products, because the infrastructure for product is not ready, infrastructure for services is ready. Hyderabad is becoming a major IT city now, across pharma on the one hand, but definitely information technology outsourcing place. It's not like the traditional outsourcing where you outsource to a TCS or a Wipro or Infosys. It is really creating your own development centers. These are employees of the multinational corporations. Ernst & Young already has 50,000 employees in Hyderabad alone to do tax services. So R&D, professional services like accounting, legal services, IT services, anything that's a corporate support that's taking place. And this will grow enormously as the world becomes more and more going through a digital corporate transformation. That's one comment. India is a major security buyer, defense buyer. And all the defense backlog of needs is going to trigger much larger investment. So there will be more, again, defense industry in general. As India privatizes, it is likely to create a growth. Not as spectacularly probably as we saw with the cell phone industry when it was privatized after 1991 reforms. Because cell phone industry could be ramped up much sooner, defense is going to be coming along, but much longer, deep involvement between defense providers and defense manufacturers. Most of it made in India, which is very important. India, of course, is lagging behind in infrastructure, and infrastructure will be necessary. Seaports, airports, for example, not just the highways. I think that multi-mode physical distribution, multi-mode transport, warehousing, that's a very key sector, and the world is waiting because the world needs more and more demand from someplace, and India is beginning to become a big one. And of course, the last one is going to be the consumer markets. India, as a country of consuming unbranded products, 60% of the consumption even today in India is unbranded products, is all becoming branded products country. And India has been buying from informal retail sector, so many middlemen. It is about to transform with digital architecture, like a cell phone, more and more like e-commerce. So Flipkart, Reliance, Jio, which is likely to become a large retailer in the same league in terms of size and scale as Alibaba in China, which came out of nowhere, and Amazon in America, which also came out of nowhere. Nobody thought Amazon will do so well. There's a whole that architecture in the consumer markets that also is going to create a spark. So the world is beginning to notice India. This is a part of a larger geopolitical ecosystem, which is where I would like to show my formal presentation. And I'll compress it, as I mentioned, because John has and Ani Agnihotri has some great questions. So I will change over to that. James, thank you very much for showing the slides. So the title is India in the New World Order at age 73. Next slide, please. So if you talk about the New World Order, the question is, what was the old world order? As of 1987, since the World War II, these 15 nations, Western Europe are the 12 common market countries. US, Canada, North America, Japan is a late entrant. 75% of all value add on raw materials was made in these 15 nations. 45% of the world trade was within these nations. And why not 70, 80%? Because they still had to import raw materials from their former colonies. African colonies, India as a colony at one time, raw materials still came, agricultural, industrial, and sometimes labor movement also. And that's why it was counted less than about 45%. All of these countries are aging and aging very rapidly. Japan is a point of no return whatsoever. Every month there are fewer Japanese living than the last month, for example. And that's a very important change in Japanese economy because domestically they have no growth left. Germany is zero population growth, as many deaths as births. We are positive in America, but that also is not at a replacement rate. It's about 1.6 children per woman as opposed to 2.1. So eventually, America also is aging. And as you know, the largest sector today in America growing is the baby boomers at age 65 as retirees. 10,000 baby boomers a day will last for decades, which means the aging population will become larger percentage of the US population. So next slide, please. World War stable. There was a balance of power between two ideologies, communism and capitalism. Cold War was a common front. Everybody aligned together. There was a common mission. There was a harmonious, surprisingly, economic, military, and political relationship because America defeated Japan on the one hand, Germany on the other hand, and got a consensus going about the world order. Created institutions to create more globalization of activities in IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and the United Nations. Next slide, please. So what has changed the world order? One of the key things that has changed the world order is the collapse of communism. That event was so massive. It's like a tectonic shift in many ways. And as you know, in the last days of communism, Gorbachev publicly announced that all of the Soviet countries are free to choose their destiny. We will not control them. So Poland, Czech, Slovak, Yugoslavia, all began to think about their future. We have a major impact of smartphones. Power goes away from cellular, the PC revolution or legacy systems primarily to more and more something that is individually, personally. I have a capability in my hand to do so many things that a massive computer could not do even. So smartphones and social media, and especially social media, has dramatically changed the world in the way we inform each other, communicate, influence, propaganda, however the word you would use. Rapid aging of advanced nations, I already mentioned that. We actually abolished the GATT system, the old General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, and created a new one called WTO because in the 90s, there was no domestic growth among these advanced countries. So they look upon trade as a growth engine. And we did a good job for that. Trade became a major issue, except now. WTO was formed in the process as an arbitrator, like a court that you can go to for disputes. Terrorism, while it was localized primarily in Afghanistan, the Taliban movement became Al-Qaeda. It has gone global today all over the world. And now we have new leaders who have very different backgrounds and very different perspectives. They are not the traditional politicians in the way we think about or coming through typical political ranks. They're very independent on their own. So their leadership will make a difference also. Next slide, please. So here is the key new world order, or what I call the disorder. China, out of nowhere in 35 to 40 years, has emerged as an economic superpower. It's a matter of time before China's GDP will surpass American GDP. And there's nothing we can do in America in terms of spark of growth, etc. The growth rate and the size itself is going to distance like two great marathon runners. One will run faster and faster and will have the stamina to go further. And China actually is on a PPP calculation, purchasing power parity, is about $30 trillion already in 2020. America is about $20 trillion, and India is about $11 trillion. I have a chart to show you later on. There's a discord among traditional allies. The NATO alliance, for example, or the European Union in general. Then the Brexit took place. They are not in together, etc. So worldwide, there's a discord among all the traditional allies, whether it's in Asia with Japan or South Korea, for example, or any of the other Southeast Asian countries. There seems to be uneasiness that the world stability is not there. And of course, we have a populism movement. You saw what happened in Belarus, for example. You see what's happening in Lebanon. There's a really popular protest. The people want to take charge of the nation. They don't trust incumbent politicians or political parties all over the world. It's not limited to Middle East, not limited, it's not the Arab Spring alone, but it is a global spring every place. And in the process, new people are coming in politics who have no political experience or background. Their parties are brand new. Think about Mitterrand, for example, at one time. Think about, of course, the current prime minister, president in France. Just think about the names. And think about saying that the incumbents are at a huge, huge disadvantage. Asia has become the pivot, not only for its economic aspects, but also actually, in fact, for military side, the security side, the South China Sea debates right now. That's key. Rise of the new middle class. This is the branding products they want in emerging markets, all branded products, rather than making it at home, buying in the marketplace, creating a huge economic growth, surprisingly in Africa also, as it is in India and China. Political and social acrimony globally. Social media have become more like acrimonious media, personal attacks, making comments that may or may not be appropriate, creating incitement in the process. And there is no checkpoint around here. There is no what we'll call the editorial control as it is in the print media, for example, or the television media. And that is very important to see who will take charge of what is appropriate or not appropriate to put it on social media. And the last one is that capital markets are sitting on the sideline. They don't know what to do. I'll make one comment about capital markets. It fundamentally has changed. The largest capital in the world now is owned by persons, individuals. Personal wealth just exceeded $160 trillion. Their passive investment into different alternative investments, stock market, bond market, gold, whatever they do, is generating about $16 trillion of additional wealth. That is bigger than most economies. The sovereign wealth is much smaller. Kings and emperors did not have wealth like that at one time. And what do those individuals decide is going to become very important to analyze. And this personal wealth comes from 20 million millionaires we have created out of nowhere, and more than 2,000 billionaires now. Look at the Jeff Bezos of the world. His company and the share that he owns, it's mind-boggling. We thought Microsoft founder Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, but they will be dwarfed by newer and newer billionaires and multi-billionaires who are coming, and people are saying who is going to be the first trillionaire even. This wealth is very important to understand. Next slide, please. So this is a new world order, and why? Old world order was Japan, now it is China. Old world order was actually Western European countries, it is India. United States still continues the journey, and that is because of their consumer markets. Most economies are driven by consumer sector. 65, 70% is not unusual. And these are the three largest consumer markets across all product categories. No matter which category you analyze, they become the largest markets, and other countries are surrendering their position as number one, number two, number three. Infrastructure is another major investment opportunity, as I mentioned. Defense, security, and they will drive the future relationships. So interestingly, if you look at the relationship, China and United States are now negative. It was a very harmonious relationship for a while, partnering together, creating global economic order of some fashion, but this has changed now. And I think the change is permanent, not a temporary one. No matter who gets elected in the United States election, I think the tension between the two nations will continue. And in fact, I'm writing a paper right now about the second Cold War, first one with the Soviets, now with China, and who will join China as counterpart to the Western economies will be very important to watch. This Cold War will be very different than the first Cold War. I call it Cold War 2.0. A lot more technology will be used. And rather than hardware, it will be more software-based. And the fundamental message is very simple. I don't have to do physical damage, destroy people, buildings. I just paralyze you. That's a very different way of thinking about the Cold War weapons that we are creating. And the battleground will not be ideology as it was in the first Cold War. It will be primarily economy. And which is why India becomes very strategic. So Russia is a very important nation to keep in the background. And if there's a question, I'll answer why I think so. But that is very important to keep in the back of your mind. Russia is a major change agent in the world politics, the geopolitics, and may become a very key counterpart either to China or a partner with India. Next slide, please. Top 10 economies of the world, which is the chart I was referring to. Purchasing power parity. China is about 28 trillion, roughly 30. US is 20. India is about 11. And there's a debate whether India is true reflection because of the large cash economy, the informal economy. It may be a little larger. As you know, some of you who know me, I have a theory called the rule of three in the corporate world. I find the same rule of three at the nation level. 3 nations dominate the world. Relative market shares, in this case measured by GDP, is about 40% for the first one, about 20% for the second one, about 10% for the third one. So we see this evolution coming along. Japan is now left behind, slower and slower GDP growth based on PPP measure. And that is very key to watch. Russia the same way, Germany, etc. So advanced countries are receding back and emerging economies, especially these two, are rising. Next chart, please. So both China and the US consider India to be strategic for their future. There is no question that China begins to believe that how do you balance rising growth and the power of India geopolitically, not only just in terms of the alignment, but also the soft power of India, for example. You know, the International Yoga Day is all over the world. That's like an Indian heritage being accepted by the rest of the world. If you go to England today, I'm told that the most convenient food is no longer fish and chips, it is the Indian curry. If you look at the Indian diaspora, it is very well integrated all over the world. In fact, at very influential positions. As you see in England, cabinet ministers are of Indian origin. Canada, clearly the case. And we saw the announcement of the announcement about Kamala Harris as the VP nomination for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden did. This would have been unthinkable maybe even 5, maybe 10 years ago. It's changing. India has all the ingredients but needs a recipe for global positioning, which is my comment, that I think it has ingredients, but it does not know how to put together the recipe to take advantage of this new opportunity. This coming opportunity, investing in India, is as big an opportunity which India missed in the 50s when the Allies, after World War II, there was a huge pent-up demand, formation of houses, appliances, cars, etc. And they wanted to outsource to India, but because of the colonial experience our leaders had, we refused. India would have been the manufacturing capital of the world starting in the 50s. There will be no Japan as a manufacturing nation, which America outsourced. There will be no China, definitely. Think about the irony of the destiny of a nation. This is a second opportunity in the same category. The world is looking toward India as an alternative to China, alternative to other places. And hopefully we can achieve that, the reality, because we have right ingredients in the place. So next chart, please, about the ingredients. As we talked about, big consumer market, very big defense and infrastructure investment opportunities. Digital talent, very important. It's almost like if you're looking for gold, where do you go? You go to where the gold mine is. That size of talent, China may have it, but there is no other nation that can come to that level of scale and size. And this is the real transformation of India toward the knowledge economy. If Indians cannot come to work abroad because of the populism movement, lots of political discussions about visa issues, H-1B visa in America, guest worker request permit in other countries, wherever they are. And so the work has to come to India. There is no other place you can go. Almost reminding of the Y2K phenomenon, where there was no other place except India, which still had people who knew about the Y2K, the old languages, Fortran, for example, or whatever it is. This talent is very important asset. Another asset I already talked about is global diaspora. And many of the leaders of the world corporations are now rising from Indian origin, and they understand India's challenges, opportunities, etc., and are willing to commit themselves to our investing in India. Growing soft power, clearly. And one of the key growing soft power of India, we never appropriately acknowledged very well, was kept in the back, is our diplomatic core. Very important to understand how strong the diplomatic core can be very valuable asset for the nation's agenda, especially in advanced countries. Strong military. Indian military has been always well respected worldwide. As you see the current Australian, Japanese, India, US, Marine, the whole sea, watching the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, Arabian Ocean, and having exercises. Indian Air Force has done very well when you have the dog fights among friendly nations, sort of exercises, and so does Indian Army. The three major branches. And now we have the space program coming. All of these nations are into space as the next battleground of some sort. But most importantly, what I think is the positive self-image. For the first time, I feel average person says, I can do it. I can control my own destiny. As opposed to having a defeatist attitude to say, there are no opportunities. Let me go abroad and do something. Today, there is no reason for people to go abroad. There are opportunities in India. When the world comes to India, why do you want to go to the world? It's a new mindset. And it happened with the IT revolution in generally, where people began to take pride that we can do a great job as a supplier to the world, and our corporations are highly respected worldwide. So the next slide, please. So my view is that India cannot remain restricted domestic economy with low-tech approach, which is the license rise. It has to go toward a more integrated global economy. You cannot be isolated like Myanmar or North Korea. It's just not possible. You really have to participate in the world economy. And the key way to participate will not be the low end making sort of a dumb toys or whatever it is. That's a resource of the country. We are not using it very well. How can we go into high tech? That is where the future will be. It is the next generation of technologies, not the last generation of technology. And it's all doable. That's the interesting point. It is all doable. It's a question of making commitment, having policy, industry all agreeing together that the future of India is going to be high tech, not low tech, very high level of engineering, science, technologies, whether it is in defense industry, infrastructure industry, automobile industry, whatever it is, as opposed to making lower quality or lower technology-based products, and going for the global integrated economy. So here are the ways to do it. Next slide, please, James. Embrace global standards. You cannot be in a global economy by having the parity with global standards. There's domestic standards for domestic products, global standards for international products makes no sense. Because competition will be in India by foreign multinationals. We already seen that in the case of appliances. You have the LG Industries, Samsung of the world, Whirlpool from America, all participating in the Indian market since the 1991 reforms. You see the same thing in the cell phones. You see the same thing in automobiles. No matter any industry, India is an open market that way. And therefore, the domestic manufacturers have to step up to the quality level that's necessary to serve the domestic market. I would say even just for the survival. Price, low price is not the solution. Become a second global sourcing destination, as we already talked about. I have a sidebar I want to comment on. One of the key things one has to do in India is to invest in vocational education training. I did research on South Korea compared to North Korea. In 35 years, the nation took a stand that the future will be vocational technical manufacturing oriented at that time, but this will be across services and manufacturing. Every job needs to be certified. Germany rose as the world-class manufacturer 150 years ago by having every job, including sanitation job, actually basically certified. So no matter what occupation, whether it's a sanitation or a scientist, makes no difference. That is very important. So become the global hub for technical talent. We already talked about that one. With R&D being located in India, very intellectually high quality things, IP rights, etc. And there's a whole gamut of services we talked about. Gain soft power through globally admired brands. My view is that the country's admiration by the rest of the world arises as much through their brands as it does through their heritage. So how can we create brands which the world admires in India, for India and for the world? Japan did that thing from low quality, low priced. They decided as a commitment, as a policy, that quality is an important one. And today we all admire Japanese products and Japanese brands. South Korea did it, and now China is doing it. It's very doable. Next slide, please. Speed up digital infrastructure, very important. It's just like in the old days, we built railroads. Today we have to build digital highways. And India has all the capabilities to do it. 5G will be implemented, it's a matter of time. The world has to have 5G now, with all the video communication like the Zoom I'm doing. India Stack is a major initiative. Aadhaar is an important platform, biometric identity. Nobody in the world has done it so far. In America, we are still using social security number. It's very primitive in many ways. It's the last generation technology, but it's the Aadhaar is a next generation of technology. And it can be opened up for other users, socially appropriate, commercially appropriate. And of course, today we have rural reach with Reliance 4G architecture going anywhere in the villages, and I have an access to the cell phone. As opposed to PC, which was creating a huge investment bottleneck. Telephone, feature phones, now smartphones are very affordable, and every middle class thinks they can have one, and they can lease it or own it. Invite foreign investment in India for global markets. And this is already happening. There's a debate whether foreign investments will control India. I don't buy that argument. In fact, if you look at London Stock Exchange, most of the corporations listed in the FTSE 500, as it is called, like S&P 500, they're all owned by foreign corporations. Britain doesn't worry about that. What you can do is to have ownership without management control. That's very possible today. The new organizational structures are coming. Google is organized that way, for example. Large corporations are organized. And by the way, I forgot, Apple will invest heavily in India. It's a matter of time. Provide huge economic incentives for R&D, innovation, entrepreneurship. And I think the government just announced National Research Foundation, very similar to National Science Foundation in America, a CDC here, similarly a CDC over there, etc. It can be done. So I think this is very, very key architecture. Next slide, please. Very strong believer in digitization. So digitize. As the saying goes, data is the new oil. Greater transparency it generates and accountability, and also enhances human capital. Technology is not a displacement of humans. It is an enhancer or enabler to humans. During the Industrial Revolution, the machines enable people to do more work. Agriculture is the worst place for a human to work. It's very tough. There is no livelihood. It's 24/7, whatever you do, 7 days. When you go from a feudal system, agriculture-based, land-based, to industrial, the wage goes up, but also people sort of well-being goes up also. And today, as you go from the industrial age to the knowledge age, the wages go up much better. and the quality of life gets much better. So I've never believed in the stuff about capital replacing human, machines replacing the humans. It's a very short-term phenomenon. Mandate management education for diplomats, military and state enterprises. Strongly believe. They are all recruited by a different process. The IAS, for example, Indian Foreign Services, Indian police system, whatever it is, they have no knowledge of management, and they do manage large enterprises, state enterprises, multi-billion-dollar, large banks, multi-billion-dollar, also lots of military installations, which is a huge, huge management issue, and diplomatic, of course, core. So I'm a very strong believer that in their academies, wherever they go, one has to have a very strong management track as an additional learning. And deepen diplomatic relationship with G7 nations, which are still going to be very important power base worldwide, both professionally and personally. I want to take a minute here. What matters is a personal relationship, not just transactional negotiation relationships. And this is where one looks at Prime Minister Modi and you see he's able to relate to very different personalities like Putin in Russia, Angela Merkel, for example, in Germany, the new head of United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, for example, or the previous ones, Obama here when he was the president, now Trump, which are two different people, personalities, two different values, to Abe in Japan, South Korea, and even to Xi Jinping. It takes a remarkable understanding about human nature. And the best ambassador for a country is always the leader of the country. You cannot delegate that responsibility. You have to participate. You have to understand, both on a personal and a professional level. And to me, he has done a fantastic job so far as an outside looking at it objectively. Let's go to the conclusion slide. Next one, please. There is a new geopolitical order. The traditional leaders and institutions are struggling to maintain world order or survive for their own livelihood. This has generated opportunity for new leadership. India is destined to become strategic globally because of the stars aligning differently or the geopolitics taking place. Next slide, please. India has the enviable ingredients, unlike many other countries, but it needs a recipe to take advantage of the new world order. The recipe is high-tech, global. Think about global and global integration with the economy and from a low-tech to a high-tech. And the 10-point recommendations will ensure India's strategic place in the new world order. I will stop here. I've been mentally rushing this time because there are some good questions that John and Ani has. I would rather have Q&A where we can dialogue and add more content, more communication. Thank you very much.
I think I'll start by asking can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Very good. As Jim unmuted us, okay. We will alternate between Ani and myself, and I'll start off by asking you a question. I listened to you very carefully, and in the past few weeks, well, really the past few months since the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union, there's been a lot of talk about the emergence of an Anglophile group, particularly around the UK, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, not only in geostrategic and intelligence terms, but perhaps in economic terms, to which you seem implicitly to have added India from an economic point of view. I am curious because there is much doubt among French and German circles about the viability of such, given the number of prior trade agreements, over 150 negotiated by the European Union, to which the UK is bound, at least until the end of the year.
Right. I think the complete alignment of United Kingdom with the continental Europe as a part of the European Union architecture created some anomalies for the UK economy, like labor movement. People love cities in England, for example. They love the freedom. So they want to come from Eastern European countries, for example, and settle down. And now we have refugees going, as you know, quite a few countries into the UK. What I was thinking about is a little different. It is the old Commonwealth nations, which were put together when the British Empire decided to dissolve and allow freedom, independence to all of the colonies in many ways. That Commonwealth nations have a common accounting system, common legal system, which is very important in any kind of a trade, investment, economic aspects, common understanding, and a common language. While India is multilingual very clearly, but it has an overarching language like Europe is discovering. English is becoming the de facto language, especially to deal with the world or even within India from one state to the other state, right? So that given that, I think it is the Commonwealth, old Commonwealth, that will be revitalized. Contemporarily, where Commonwealth markets included Australia, obviously, Canada, obviously, United Kingdom, but UK is a major market in many areas. 75 million people roughly, but its military-wise BAE systems is one of the largest systems in the world. It supplies to America. It can have a huge military expansion into countries like India, which needs the technology. So there are many pieces out there that many of these are like the British, Airways BA, BP, which is an energy company. I can just give you names. Unilever is already in India as a business Anglo, Dutch company primarily. So yeah.
Thank you, Jag. Ani, you're correct.
Yeah. Dr. Sheth, thank you for your wonderful presentation. My question is, my first question is that the government of India and Prime Minister Modi has recently announced a new education policy for the country after almost 34 years. And the central thrust of this education policy is to make India a great knowledge superpower. So the question is that what can government of India do or should do to integrate government research labs, university labs, and corporate sector, like most of the advanced knowledge superpower countries do. The integration between these three bodies is very important to become a knowledge superpower.
Right. There are three elements. First of all, the new education policy will allow more freedom in one sense. Education always has been under the British days very local, state by state autonomy, which means you have different standards, just like in America. We are even further at local district level almost, local county level, pretty much education. I'm talking about the primary and secondary education, but so is true about the college education with state university systems, for example. It's very much state by state education. I think education needs some commonality. This new national education policy provides a framework to say this would be federal laws as opposed to state laws, in many ways, federal policy. And it will do a couple of things. First of all, it will stop many Indian students going abroad to study. Because why do I go abroad spending money? Family is not really comfortable sending young people out.
Right.
And now you bring education to you. So when world-class institutions under the new policy are free to open up campuses without restrictions like real estate, you must own so much of property, etc., you can easily still start campuses. So I do believe that the world top universities will look at India as a great opportunity, not only for student and revenues, but picking the brains of Indians. If you look at the worldwide, whether it's in England or in Netherlands, or even to some extent Germany, definitely in America and Canada, the real scientist background has been Asians. Chinese orientation, Indian orientation. Look at how many people in America are the top scholars of Indian origin. They all studied in India. They got their education in India at either an IIT or some even non-known engineering college. They've done very well. In education, we have done very well. Science today with the COVID problem, if you look at the mass media, the person in charge of a public health of a major institution now tends to be of Indian origin. Because India invested way back when 73 years ago or 70 years in, as you know, medicine and engineering.
Right.
So you need the talent for R&D. So now universities will go to India, not just for teaching and revenues, but also for R&D.
Right.
So that's one. Second thing, you're so right about the corporate side. It is unfortunate that in Indian enterprises, which came primarily as trading companies, they shifted trading to manufacturing in the 50s, where the government decided foreigners should not be allowed to manufacture in India, take over the corporations, which are like a British corporations, as national corporations, etc. Given that situation, India's just Indian enterprises skip the whole R&D phenomenon. They basically said, whatever technology is out there, let's just make products from that, rather than being innovators. The only innovators maybe more recently. Most of the R&D knowledge was among the government laboratories, which was centralized. Great talented people, but under the government bureaucracy. If we can divest those, for example,
Right.
and there are lots of people who are very willing to be divested as scientists, give the freedom and the autonomy of a private sector, or encourage private sector to have their own R&D centers, like the Bell Labs, where I have worked as an advisor. General Motors Tech Center, probably the best in automotive sector. If our corporations can invest like that with the outside funding that comes in, like the National Research Foundation, which they're announcing, which will be a major. So they have to invest heavily in National Research Foundation, a CDC of India, for example, NIH of India, where government pumps money, which corporations, scientists can be hired and create corporate laboratories. I want to make one comment. In the US, you've seen many Nobel Prize winners come from corporations. They worked at IBM, they worked at Xerox, HP, it just goes on and on. This division that we created, that corporations are not there to create knowledge, government is the one who creates knowledge, corporations apply the knowledge, I think is blurring the boundaries pretty much. It's a joint cooperation. So to me, that is very exciting part because we have the talent.
Sure. John?
Dr. Sheth, you've just made a strong case for semi-privatization of the educational enterprise.
Right.
I want to sort of broaden that perspective a little bit. Given the popularity of the notion that never let a crisis go unleveraged, I'm wondering if we can sort of recall that the dismantling of the licensing Raj began, to all intents and purposes, in the economic crisis of 1991. Might we not say that COVID 2019 provides an equally intense opportunity for India to really progress along that dismantling and open up more broadly its economy and increase the level of foreign direct investment beyond 10% of capital fixed capital accretion?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. There's an analog that was an economic crisis in 1991, lack of foreign balance of payment reserves, for example. India could not import things because it couldn't pay, and rest is the world, change in the world. Enormous thing. I think COVID crisis is another opportunity like that, clearly. This is the time when even the public opinion can be swung positively through political process to say, we must change. And we can become change, positive message. It's doable, in other words. It's not just dream pipeline, it can be done. I clearly agree. Two sectors very important would be education and healthcare. And therefore, both of them will become much more aligned in terms of this, what I would call new initiatives. India has always experimented in education. From 12 standards as we have it, they went into 11 plus 1 from pre-university to reduce the cost. Then they came out with 10 plus 2. After 10th standard, a public examination, and then 2 more years if you are ready for college kind of a notion, right? And 10 plus 2 plus 3. Then they came out with a private university system, as you know. You had the University Grants Commission, which is the local state-by-state regulation. Then they came out with the AICTE, postgraduate education would be at a federal level regulation. Then they came out with the idea about creating private universities to increase the capacity. The demand was so high. They came out with the government institutions like IIT and IIM in every state. So the numbers were expanded enormously given the demand out there. Strong experiment on online education. India actually is quite a lot, surprisingly, without us knowing. Management alone education, IIM Bangalore now has 1 million students from the rest of the world also. There was a plan at one time to India become a destination for students from Africa, Middle East, and other countries. Why should they go to the Western world? If the Western universities and their education system is allowed in India, it can become an education hub as it can become a healthcare hub, actually, surprisingly. It's very possible. So I do agree with you that this is the best time to bring as much outside perspective into India. It'll raise the Indian standards themselves in the process. Because if you are in my neighborhood as a foreign university and you are doing very well, I can have to raise my standards, through just sheer competitive process, if nothing else. So I do agree that this is a great opportunity and it can be done. I think the problem is that a sense of urgency has to come. And in India, things are very slow because of the democracy on the one hand, but the whole procedures and policies that are put in place. So how do we disband all of them? And as the phrase goes, easy to do business with, which I've advocated more than a decade ago. Can you make it so easy? Online technology now allows much faster transactions to be done, but still there's a tremendous amount of bureaucracy. How can we somehow minimize the bureaucracy so that people feel like they're welcome here, And I think today you see that tone. Today ambassadors of India are really trade ambassadors. They're advocating come to India, not for bureaucracy, passport control, etc., but something that's exciting place to come. I think it is happening a little slower than you and I would like, but it is going to bring about a change. And education will be the first one. Eventually, there will be a national healthcare policy, the same way, a document allowing a lot more global integration.
Right. So, Dr. Sheth, my next question is, India is by and large still an agricultural country.
Yes.
And we are in Georgia, and Georgia has a very large percentage of its economy is agriculture based. So my question is that what can India do to come up with world global agriculture brands or processed food brands? For example, one name comes to my mind is like Amul. In terms of milk and milk-based products and all. And that will help countries like agrarian economy of India.
Yeah, no question. I think there was a very strong move when I was a student, way in the early 60s or late 50s, when there was a cooperatives movement. Amul came out of that. In India alone, Amul is a very good model for at least 10 more states or 20 states. If every state can produce its own Amul, because what it does is two things. It makes the standard high. The variability from one cow herder to the other is reduced now. Make the product packaged more attractive. It's a marketing arm of, cooperative essentially. Create a economic value by listing it in the stock market. So every farmer is wealthy. There are about 70,000 farmers last I knew in that Amul system. Each is a cow herder with about 3 cows per farmer. Very low. So how do you take this lowest denomination who has no scale, no expertise, no capability? He thinks that if I can milk the cow and get my money this afternoon, I'm okay. They put a system together under much tougher circumstances than ever before. Today, it's much easier to duplicate Amul, and not only just for dairy, and we are the largest consumer and the producer of milk and milk-based products in the world by a long shot, given the population and the popularity of milk as a key nutrient or ingredient in our daily diet, right, for everything. And milk can have so many byproducts like the yogurt and the mithai, sweets, etc. It just goes on and on. It's a raw material which can be molded into many more finished products, which increases the value. So I'm very fond of having cooperatives done in a modern way. However, cooperatives cannot do well unless you invest in technology. Our farming is so primitive. It is the same as hundreds of years old. We still use the bullock cart the same way, the farmer the same way. Rice planting is the same way, for example, which is why it's a very low tech, lowest of the low tech. If you can make farming more modern, technology based. Technology today is more affordable also, surprisingly. Like GPS systems are in place. I can give you examples, but I'll cut short my answer. So my view is that farming is the best place, agriculture, to make high tech. In America, one farmer produces enough food for 75 people now. In India, one farmer produces no more than 2.5 people population. Same farmer. Today, Vietnam does a better job in cashew nuts per acre in terms of productivity than India does. India was the capital of cashew nuts, but today Vietnam is taking over that market because they have jumped into modern farming techniques. Then you have all of the agricultural land grant universities like University of Georgia in Athens, University of Illinois, Cornell has one, for example. They are all agricultural colleges that innovate new methods, procedures, processes, and they have basically extension people, as they call it.
Right.
They train the farmers. I think all that system is more vocational, technical, my view, has to be put in place. But farming can be very exciting in India. The key nice advantage in India is that it has enough climatic zones, so I can plant different crops in different parts of the country. It is the biggest in cotton today, by the way, with a primitive technology. I can increase the capacity of cotton a lot more by modern farming techniques. It is one of the biggest sugarcane producers in the world. Same thing. These are the existing crops.
Right.
Then you have the whole fruits or orchards, for example. Like Brazil is able to make 50% of the orange juice for America. India can make the same. India has a tropical climate. So it's a question of modern farming.
Thank you.
I think maybe the last question before we turn it over to the audience, but
Sure.
I think I will ask you this last question, which I think is important. 10 years of economic liberalization, maybe 20 years actually, has unchained India and Indians. And the rise of the middle class, which has been talked about for really the last 30 years, symbolized by the Maruti 800 car. But equally importantly is the fact that India is now producing truly global multinational companies that are present over the world. One thinks of Tata Steel, Aditya Birla, Tata Motors, Bharti Airtel. Are we likely to see an increase in the presence of Indian multinationals, sometimes referred to as emerging country multinationals? In my opinion, they are not emerging anymore. They are full-fledged global multinationals.
Right. No, John, you are so right. The rise of multinationals from emerging markets is the new trend. It's selective in some countries by an industry. Mexico is a great multinational emerging economy. Grupo Bimbo owns all of the flour mills in America, for example, because Mexico and Mexican restaurants all use a lot of flour. We make breads, and all the stuff. So they are very good at that. Cemex is a world-class company out of Mexico. It is true of Brazil. Through the private equity guys, Anheuser-Busch is owned by now InBev. And they just own South Africa Brewing Company, which own Miller. So South Africa has several. The largest of these multinationals rising out of the country is China, across industries. Whether it's a steel industry, aluminum industry, raw materials kinds, industrial raw materials, or finished products like Haier, which is very similar to the rise of Japanese corporations in terms of consumer products, for example. So I'm watching China, where it seems like it's all across all industries, by and large. India is having a lot more capabilities in several industries Like carbon black, Aditya Birla Group is the largest in the world through acquisitions. Flat sheet aluminum, they bought Novelis, which is based in Atlanta. And that Novelis now puts Hindalco, which is their subsidiary they own, one of the largest in the world. Mahindra and Mahindra is aspiring to become one of the largest tractor makers worldwide. They bought some Chinese companies. They invested capacity in America, for example. And in the small size tractors measured by horsepower, they dominate against John Deere, for example. So it's very interesting. So it is happening in a more selective way out of India. And the reason primarily is because you have a strong domestic demand. And you say, am I still continuing growing the demand? Why do I go international? Except there's an export market kind of an attitude. Out of nowhere, you have seen Wipro Consumer Care, the people who make soaps. Santur is a good brand, always finding market in India, suddenly buys companies out of Singapore into Southeast Asia. In fact, they market their products in Southeast China in a big way. So Wipro Brands, Unza is the name of the company they bought, is now actually into that. Marico, another consumer products company, is in Bangladesh. Very successful. Godrej, which is a company which does, the industrial products, but also consumer. In the consumer products, they have basically mosquito repellent, main business. There are about 2 or 3 companies in Africa. The tropical climate is very similar. You can understand the mosquito species, etc. But it is not to a scale and the visibility that one would have. I think that's what we need. China has that scale and visibility. Their corporations are humongous in size. And I think that is where we need to go, except for Tata's. And of course, now Reliance looks like one of those people which will become very large scale, although domestically, but they will be in the size of large scales. The biggest sector I think India can do worldwide in terms of expansion are into professional services, 2 of them. India's life insurance corporation is one of the giant corporations in the world in life policies. More innovative than anywhere in the world, as I've done advising into many life policies, life insurance. LIC has remained mostly domestic. Through acquisitions, LIC, because with this COVID, there will be some aggregation, some consolidation of insurance business also. It can become a major acquirer to go global. LIC. SBI Bank and the consolidation of the banks. I have always claimed that India has too many banks. You don't need so many banks, all owned by the same entity called the government. They're all nationalized banks. And they are basically fragmenting the market. You need the scale. We have the size in India, but not a scale. And the scale can be created by consolidating those banks into some superstructure. Like Tata Sons is a superstructure which owns Tata Motors partly, it owns Tata Steel, Tata Tea, etc. And by the way, Tata Tea is number 2 in the world now in the beverage business, surprising to everybody out of nowhere. So there are pockets of those things, but they're not as heavily publicized, or people are not tracking them as well. So I totally agree that in the globally integrated architecture, you are both a domestic player and a global player at the same time, based upon research, comparative advantage, resource advantage.
You did not mention pharma, given
Yes.
President Trump's most recent executive order to reshore some pharma production into the United States. But
Totally agree. Pharma is the key one. It is doing quite well as an industry. Pharma is growing well both on the domestic market. Given the price caps in India, they have to innovate at a lower cost, which they're able to do because scientists are relatively less wages than around here. The process is faster, however you do it, and it has an opportunity worldwide. But it has to become much more proprietary discovery rather than generics. It has to go into that category, which it can do. It's a question of making a commitment. So we think that the new funding opportunities government provides for innovation, where the corporations can bid for those contracts to say, I'll put my money. COVID is clearly creating that architecture now. Government funding Johnson & Johnson here, or Moderna, for example. Russians funding, their private sector. I think if we can do the same thing, So again, I think, John, your main point is so key. What is a adversity right now can be made into an opportunity. And you have to have a sense of,
Yes.
doing it urgently. Yeah.
I think Jim will be moderating the questions which
Yes.
are coming from the very substantial audience.
Okay.
Yes, we've had some very lively questioning, and I want to get to them really fast because there's a lot of questions out there. They're really good questions. Thank you all for submitting them, and I'm going to try and condense some together. So hopefully we get everything, at least all the major parts. As manufacturing, as you highlighted, manufacturing may move from China to India. What sectors do you see that will benefit? And how can India move to prevent other nations that are maybe a little bit lower on the chain, Brazil, Mexico, those locations, to emerge as dark horses to make sure that India receives those, moves into those? What actions can it take?
Yeah, right. The immediate sectors moving to India from China are into three categories. Pharma is clearly one category, and healthcare in general. Second category has to do with the technology. There's no question that more and more what China has achieved on the wireless technology, especially the mobile phone technology, whether it's online payment systems, manufacturing of devices, for example, or the networking itself, I think most of the manufacturers will shift their emphasis, focus, and invest in India. So technology is a second major area. Pharmaceutical is the one area that I already talked about. And pharma does not mean just medicine. It includes medical devices, for example, and maybe the healthcare delivery system. These are the three parts of a typical pharma. So those two are very obvious. The third area is appliances. Given that South Korea is already there in India, there is a possibility that they will allow more and more shift of appliances which are made in China, especially television sets, for example, rather than buy from Chinese-made television sets or microwave ovens. 94% of microwave ovens are all made in China today. Remember, here is a technology invented in America. We outsourced to Japan on a license. Japanese eventually gave up to the South Koreans who took over. Now it's all China. There are many industries that have evolved from us to Japan, to South Korea, to China. We can map those and say, is India next, for example? I think it's very possible. It is also very possible that the whole defense sector, if there was anything, will move much larger to India, just to counterbalance in many ways. India is a place where you make things not only just for India, but for the neighboring countries and the rest of the world, actually. So there are events like that. I've always claimed that F-16 is 2 generations old fighter plane that can be all co-located in India. It is co-produced basically. It's called, offset of some sort, direct offset in this case. India has the talent and the manpower, and it still has at least $50 billion revenue just on the install base, maintenance, repair. Even if you don't sell anything new, India can manage that. So there's a whole maintenance, repair kind of a business that can be done. India is very ready for aircraft industry. It is one of the largest buyers of flying aircraft, airlines. After the COVID, airline industry is supposed to grow 15-17%, and it can take that market away again from China. Is a big market growing, and China will have its own aircraft manufacturer rather than buy from Boeing or even Airbus because of the current distancing the world is making. So they will start their own production, which they can do. So we have an opportunity in India, the counterbalancing. Now the dark horses is a very key one. I totally agree. We are underestimating how the whole world is eagerly waiting to get this opportunity in their backyard. Mexico is a clear good example because Mexico is a good country for manufacturing, surprisingly. Well-trained workers, scale is there. Automobile industry is very big, part of the NAFTA architecture or USMCA as they call it. So there are similarly pockets in Southeast Asia, whether it's Philippines or Vietnam. Vietnam is much more important because Chinese are providing the capabilities to shift the capacity from China to Vietnam. And there are pockets of countries in Africa. Morocco is emerging out of nowhere as the automobile hub for all of North Africa. All automobile makers are hubbing in Morocco. Morocco becomes a very key contender. You can map it out pretty much. So India cannot take it for granted and simply hope that companies will come. Has to actively chase, compete, show why India is a better alternative. Totally agree.
Okay, here's a question. India, I'm on the fly. I'm producing this. India needs to focus probably on Industry 4.0 and high technologies, but in the meantime, India needs to continue to employ the majority of the population. Yeah. How does it bridge the gap between getting from there to from here to there?
Very important question, because employment is a key battleground in any politics, whether it's in America, which is exactly what we are doing here, or whether it's in India. In a democracy, employment has been always the key issue, not wealth, surprisingly. Wealth comes eventually. In India, the situation is very different. I was surprised when I found out that 90% of all people working in India work on contract labor. There is no formal employment process. Everybody has a contract labor. There are factories after factories on a contract basis making products for well-known brands. And the labor laws, we blame them. It's a British system of, shop stewards, as they call it, no collective bargaining. We rejected that model in America long ago by saying that we need to have a collective bargaining of the employees to bargain against the large corporations, which is a very interesting idea. So both sides are very professional. Here, each factory has a labor union person who can literally paralyze that particular pay. So people say, why employ? So employment has a disadvantage because of the legal structure and the way it was organized under the British system. So either one is to massively reform that, or more urgently and more immediately, the informal economy that hires 90% of the wage earners, how do you make sure that the informal sector complies with the rule, laws, and rules and regulations? If we can put GST in mom and pop stores, we can do the same about mom and pop factory. I was really surprised. So that 10% is formal employment. How can we make a goal to say that 10% formal employment, where you get a paycheck is deposited, not a cash economy, move that to, let's say, 30% as a goal in 1 decade. It will happen with newer industries coming in, like the IT industry, knowledge industry, but the traditional industries, we have to shift from informal economy to formal economy.
Another question, economic nationalism is on the rise around the world. It obviously will affect globalization of trade and services. Yes. How can India take steps to make sure that it is not negatively affected by this rise?
Right. Clearly, you're right. It is not deglobalization, but I call it re-globalization. Same multinational corporations, rather than making things in one country to supply the rest of the world, let's say China, will actually create distributed manufacturing, country by country, not even a region by region. First of all, to make sure that if one supply chain doesn't work for natural disaster, political unrest, they have other supply chains that they can divert the capacity or demand primarily. I think distributed manufacturing will happen. I also believe that for the first time, with Trump administration becoming so aggressive about the trade disputes, the world will basically say more and more bilateral agreements will be necessary rather than a multilateral. So TPP was a multilateral, 11, 12 countries together. It fell apart because Trump administration walked out from that one. There are still 10 countries, but without America, it makes no sense. So you have instead bilateral agreement. So India engages more into bilateral agreement with Australia, which wants to shift the capacity, buying power from China to India. You can have a similar bilateral agreement with United Kingdom. You can have a similar bilateral agreement with, let's say, Canada, or a part of a USMCA architecture. And clearly, America would be more interested in having a bilateral agreement with India because bilateralism seems to be prevailing. That's one answer. Second answer is to shift from trade to investment. In other words, you invest into different countries, but you can invest in the world. So you have to invest selectively in a few countries, which is your battleground, which is where your opportunity. I mean, Procter & Gamble, for example, is a large corporation, invested in so many countries and decided they cannot compete very well with Unilever on the one hand, Henkel, German company on the other hand, Nestle on the third hand. So what they decided was to say selectively we will choose our markets and the battlegrounds, both from a supply viewpoint and a demand viewpoint, and they're down to maybe 10, 11 key countries. As will Amazon will do, as will Walmart will do. I really believe it's very important for India to nurture large-scale global retailers online, like Flipkart, Walmart, or brick and mortar like Walmart, worldwide, because they can take Indian products made in India on a world scale. India is very dominant in diamond industry. There is no second alternative for mass-produced diamonds. America is the largest diamond consumer, and by the way, most Americans buy the diamond now at Sam's Club and Walmart. Think about that. Walmart can take those diamonds now to Mexico because it's very strong in Mexico, to Canada. Walmart is very good in China. And for the first time, you see a possibility of an Indian-made product totally accepted by Chinese. That's almost like unthinkable at one time. But through that, I do believe that companies like Walmart, Amazon, Flipkart, Reliance, when it comes up as a retail thing, will generate probably 1 million new suppliers out of India very quickly, all putting new processes in place. Hopefully, more formal employment, legal, more labor being utilized in a positive way as opposed to exploitative way. Government can impose some guidelines, if not laws, to come out with that architecture. During Diwali, it's very fascinating. You find today Indian mithai, the sweets. People order it through Amazon and it comes here, or their friends and families in India. Last 2 Diwalis have been remarkable, how much Indian goods like Haldiram's products, or similar names are sold through online retailers.
Great. Well, we are a few minutes above time. I really want to thank you, Dr. Sheth. It was such an enlightening presentation and question and answers. Wish we had more time. Probably next time we will have more time. The plan between 2 great professors, Dr. Jag Sheth and Dr. John McIntyre. I also want to thank my partner, James Hadley, for organizing the event, and we would like to share with our audience that Georgia Tech Global Business Forum and USA India Business Summit is going to be held virtually on October 26th and 27th. And you all will be hearing from us about the program. We encourage you to send your ideas and do participate in October with our event. It will be held virtually. Once again, thank you, Dr. Sheth. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim. Have a good day. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed it.